Hello, students, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about a word you hear all the time, credit. Now, this is a very important concept in our Class 10 economics syllabus, but it's also something that affects our daily lives. So we're going to break it down, understand what it means, why we need it, and what are the important terms that come along with it. Let's begin. So here is our plan for today's lesson. First, we'll start with the most basic question. What is credit? Then we'll explore why it's so important for our economy. We will see how it works in real life with the story of a shoe manufacturer named Salim. After that, we will get into the details, what we call the terms of credit. And finally, we will look at the two sides of credit, how it can be a very helpful tool, but also how it can be risky. So, let's start with our very first topic. What exactly is credit? And why do we need it in the first place? I want you to just pause and think for a moment. Can you think of any situations where someone has to spend money before they can earn any money? A good example is a farmer. A farmer has to buy seeds and fertilizers and pay for water. All of that happens now. But the income from selling the crops will only come many months later. Or what about a shopkeeper? He has to buy all his stock for Diwali or Eid well in advance. The spending happens first, and the earning comes later. And that is the central problem. You see, in so many economic activities, there is this time gap. You spend today, but you earn tomorrow. Credit is what helps to build a bridge over that gap. Let's look at the official definition now. Credit, which you might also know as a loan, is basically an agreement. It's an agreement where a lender gives a borrower money, or goods, or even services. And in return, the borrower makes a very important promise, a promise to pay them back in the future. This promise of future payment is the most important part of what credit is. Okay, so now we know what credit is. Let's move to our next section and find out why it is so important. Why do we call it the engine of economic activity? Well, one of the biggest reasons we need credit is to meet something called working capital needs. Now, working capital might sound like a complicated term, but it's actually very simple. It's just the money needed for all the day-to-day expenses to keep production going, before the final product is even ready to be sold. Let's take an example to make this really clear. Meet Salim. He's a shoe manufacturer. Now, to make shoes, he first has to buy raw materials like leather. He has to pay wages to his workers. All this money that he needs for these daily expenses, that is his working capital. He will only get money later, once the shoes are made and sold, so credit helps him cover these initial costs. Salim's story is a really good, real-world example of how credit can be a very positive thing and how it can help a business to grow. So let's look at his story. All right, let's follow Salim's production cycle step by step. It all starts with a big opportunity. He gets a large order for 3,000 pairs of shoes, but he has a problem. He doesn't have the money for the leather and to hire extra workers right now. So what does he do? He uses credit. He gets two loans. First, he asks the leather supplier to give him leather now and promises to pay him later. And second, he gets some advance money from the trader who gave him the order. With this credit, he completes the order on time, delivers the shoes, and makes a very good profit. And with that profit, he easily repays all the money that he had borrowed. And so, as you can see, credit played a very vital and positive role for Salim. It was not a problem for him. It was a tool that helped him. It allowed him to expand his business, complete a big order, and in the end, increase his earnings. He was better off because of the credit he took. This shows that when you are reasonably sure about your future income, credit can be a very, very productive thing. Salim's story is a clear success. But this brings up a very important question. Is credit always so helpful? Is every loan the same as Salim's? Well, the answer, as you can probably guess, is no. And this is where we have to start talking about the risks involved. You see, every single loan, whether it's big or small, comes with its own set of rules and conditions. In economics, we have a special name for this. We call them the terms of credit. So, what are these terms of credit? Well, they generally include four important things: the interest rate, something called collateral, the documentation that is required, and the mode of repayment. Let's understand each one of these. First up is the interest rate. This is simply the extra cost of borrowing money. For example, if you borrow 100 rupees at a 10% annual interest rate, you have to pay back the original 100 rupees, that's called the principal, plus 10 rupees extra as interest. So in total, you have to repay 110 rupees. That extra interest is what the lender earns for giving you the money. Next, we have a very important term, collateral. Just think of collateral as a type of security or a guarantee.
It is an asset that the borrower owns, like their land, their house, or even a vehicle that they promise to the lender. Now, why is this so important? Well, if for some reason the borrower is unable to repay the loan, the lender has the right to sell that collateral to get their money back. It's like a safety net for the lender.
This picture here is a perfect example. When someone takes a home loan from a bank, the house itself becomes the collateral. The bank will keep the property papers as security and will only return them when the entire loan is repaid. This gives the bank the confidence that their money is safe.
And the last two terms are quite simple. Documentation just means all the paperwork that you need to submit, like your identity proof, your address proof, or your salary records. This helps the lender decide if you are eligible for the loan. And the mode of repayment is simply the plan for how you will pay the loan back. For example, in equal monthly installments, what we call EMIs, over a few years.
So, we have seen that credit can help people grow, just like it helped Salim. But we have also seen that every loan comes with its own terms and conditions. This brings us to the two sides of credit. It is a powerful tool, but it can also be very risky. Let's compare two stories to really understand this. We already know about Salim's positive story. Now let's consider Swapna, who is a small farmer. She also took a loan for her cultivation, hoping she would have a good harvest. But unfortunately, her crops failed because of pests. Now, with no income, she could not repay her loan. So for Swapna, the credit did not lead to growth. Instead, it pushed her into something called a debt trap. This is a terrible situation where you have to take on new loans just to pay off your old loans. She was left much worse off than before. So, the main point to understand here is this. Credit is not always good or always bad. Whether it is useful or harmful depends on two things. First, is there a high risk in the situation, like in farming where the weather is unpredictable? And second, what are the terms of credit? If the interest rate is very high, it becomes much more difficult to repay. Understanding these things is key.
All right, let's do a quick summary of what we've learned today. First, credit is a loan that is based on a promise to pay in the future. Second, we need it to meet the working capital needs in many economic activities. Third, it can be very productive and can help increase income, as we saw in Salim's story. Fourth, every loan has its own rules, which we call the terms of credit. And finally, the most important lesson. Understanding these terms is absolutely essential if you want to use credit safely and avoid the risk of a debt trap.
And now, before we end, I want to leave you with a question to think about. This is for your exams and also for life. Think about any large purchase that your family or a family you know has made using a loan, maybe a scooter, a refrigerator, or a car. Try to think, what do you think were the terms of credit involved? Was there an interest rate? Was there any collateral? Applying these concepts to the real world is the best way to really understand them. That is all for today. Thank you.